Today, we're going to dig into a story that is so unbelievable it almost sounds made up. We're talking about a strategic blunder that saw the largest stockpile of silver in human history, a treasure built over decades for our national security, just vanish completely. So, let me ask you a question. Do you think the US government has a big pile of silver stashed away somewhere, for a rainy day, maybe next to the gold in Fort Knox? Most people would say, well, of course they do. It just makes sense, right? It's a comforting thought, knowing our leaders planned ahead.
But here's the shocking truth. That comforting belief, it's completely wrong. The official U.S. strategic stockpile of silver today is exactly zero. Not a little, not classified, it's zero. Gone.
And let's be really clear about what this means. This isn't just a low inventory. This was a total, deliberate, decades-long sell-off. A self-inflicted wound that has some pretty serious consequences that we're only now starting to grapple with.
To really wrap our heads around how big of a deal this is, we have to jump in a time machine. We need to go back and see just how enormous this national treasure really was.
At its peak, back in the 1950s, the U.S. Treasury held over 3 billion ounces of silver. Now, that's a number so big it's hard to even picture. To put it in perspective, America wasn't just another country with silver. We were basically the Saudi Arabia of silver. We held the world's reserve and pretty much set the price.
And that silver wasn't just sitting there collecting dust. For a lot of you watching, this will be a trip down memory lane. The dollar bill in your wallet used to be a literal claim check. You could take one of these silver certificates to a bank and walk out with a real, solid silver dollar. It meant our money was backed by something tangible, something real, a concept that feels pretty foreign today.
But, that system, which had worked so well for so long, started to come apart at the seams in the late 50s and early 60s. The reason? A huge boom in industrial demand. Silver was suddenly needed for everything from photography to the new field of electronics, and that set the stage for a major crisis. The whole crisis boiled down to one magic number, $1.29. You see, the moment the price of silver hit $1.29 an ounce, the actual silver metal inside our dimes, quarters, and half dollars became worth more than their face value.
And that triggered something called Gresham's Law. It sounds complicated, but it's really simple. Think about it. Why would you ever spend a silver quarter to buy 25 cents worth of gum if you could just melt it down and sell the silver for 26 cents? You wouldn't. People would immediately start hoarding the valuable silver coins, the good money, and the whole coinage system was about to grind to a halt.
So the government had to make a choice. In 1965, President Johnson signed the act that took silver out of our everyday coins. That solved the immediate problem, but it created a new one. What to do with 3 billion ounces of now surplus silver? Well, they started selling it off. Slowly at first in the 70s, but then, as you can see, things really sped up in the 90s. And by 2002, the job was done. The last ounce was sold. The entire strategic stockpile was gone. The consequences of that decision are still playing out today. And by the way, if you're finding this explainer valuable, it really helps us out if you like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.
Okay, I can almost hear some of you thinking, come on, there's no way it's all gone. They have to have a secret stash somewhere, right? A country this powerful wouldn't be that short-sighted? It's a perfectly logical question, but there's a smoking gun, irrefutable proof that the vaults are in fact empty.
And that proof comes from the U.S. Mint itself. See, the Mint is required by law to make American silver eagle coins to meet public demand. But get this, in just the last few years, they've had to stop making them multiple times. Their official reason? They couldn't find enough silver to buy in the global market. Now let that sink in. The United States government couldn't produce its own legal tender coin. If there was any secret stash anywhere, they would have used it long before facing that kind of public embarrassment.
And this is where the story shifts from being just a fascinating piece of financial history to a very real and very serious national security crisis. Because a shortage of collector coins is one thing. A shortage of silver for the military's most advanced weapons, well, that's something else entirely.
What you have to understand is that for certain military applications, silver is simply irreplaceable. There's no substitute. We're talking about the guidance systems in every Tomahawk missile, the incredibly powerful batteries in our most advanced torpedoes, and critical parts in satellites and jets. When a piece of equipment absolutely cannot fail, engineers demand silver.
Now, just look at this contrast. During the Cold War, the official policy was to keep a 3-year supply of silver on hand, enough to fight a major war without importing a single ounce. That was strategic preparedness. And today, our buffer is 0 days.
The U.S. military is now completely dependent on a just-in-time global supply chain for a metal it needs for its most vital weapon system.
You know, what this really shows is a deep, fundamental disagreement about what power really is. In the West, the idea took hold that if you control the printing press, you can solve any problem. But in the East, countries like China and Russia held on to a much older idea. He who has the physical gold and silver makes the rules. So, while we were busy selling our strategic assets, they were busy stacking.
So, where does this leave us? Well, you can't have a gaping hole in your national security forever. At some point, the reality is going to hit home at the Pentagon and in Congress. And when it does, it's going to create a pretty dramatic situation in the silver market.
For anyone paying attention, this situation lays out a pretty clear playbook. First, without the U.S. government dumping millions of ounces on the market anymore, that artificial lid on prices is gone. Second, we know that sooner or later, the Defense Department is going to have to come back into the market as a huge buyer that doesn't care about the price. Third, the Mint already showed us that when push comes to shove, having the physical metal is all that matters. And finally, when you put it all together, it means holding physical silver is like holding a strategic chess piece that a superpower foolishly gave away and will one day be desperate to get back.
So we'll leave you with this to think about. The Great Unstacking was a monumental failure in long-term strategic thinking. We traded a vital wartime insurance policy for a few decades of budget fixes, and it forces us to ask a really chilling question. If they drop the ball this badly on silver, what other critical materials have been ignored, and what does that mean for our future?